On this week's Carrier Wrap, we'll look back at some of the top news stories from the carrier space over the past week, as well as talk with Mac Nation about some IoT strategies for mobile operators.
Today's episode is brought to you by Telecom Careers, the #1 global telecom and wireless job board, telecomcareers.net.
So thanks for joining us on this week's Carrier Wrap. I'm your host, Dan Meyer, editor-in-chief at RCR Wireless News. And joining me again, as always, is our managing editor, Kinney. Hey, Sean, thanks for joining us this week. Again, we appreciate it.
Always my pleasure, Dan. Thanks for having me, man.
Sounds good. Well, let's dig into some carrier news. So we've kind of had a bit of a holiday over the past couple of days, and so we're kind of catching up on about a week and a half worth of news. And it did seem like just prior to the Thanksgiving holiday that there was some kind of aggressive moves out there by some operators kind of getting ahead of the Black Friday, Cyber Monday curve there. I know one thing that came out, I think, and was T-Mobile came out, I think, last week, targeting Sprint with some specific marketing moves. They come out with a $200 credit that they were giving to Sprint customers that switched over to the carrier. This is part of T-Mobile's promise to kind of target some operators, some specific operators over the next coming weeks. And so it looked like Sprint was their first target. They came out with, again, giving $200 to customers who might be switching over. And again, kind of an aggressive move, not a very very unique kind of move, just giving cash to customers. But again, something I thought was kind of unique, at least in targeting Sprint initially there.
Well, I guess what I took away from that, Dan, is it seems like Sprint is almost digging into T-Mobile's marketing playbook. And I think John Legere actually tweeted something to the effect of, hey, Sprint, if you need to borrow our marketing playbook, let me know. But yeah, you're right. Right after T-Mobile came out with their, right after Sprint came out with their cut your bill in half promotion, we saw this sort of response from T-Mobile, which is a $200 credit in addition to cutting the bill in half for Sprint customers. And when I mentioned Sprint sort of stealing some marketing from T-Mobile, I'm talking specifically about launching a advertising campaign at the Sprint headquarters in the Pacific Northwest to correspond with the new entrance of a T-Mobile marketing strategist up there. But anyway, it's just like, I'm ready to go to Vegas, go to Caesars, sit down in the Coliseum and just watch Legere and Claret go 10 rounds and just be done with it.
Yeah, they've been very interesting to watch them two go at each other. And yeah, you're right. I mean, it does seem like that, again, they've been bickering at each other via Twitter and things like that. And, and historically, we've had trade shows where, we get all the CEOs on stage and, they'll look, cordial to each other and, be up there and talk about industry issues. But I'm still waiting, for these two to be on stage together somewhere just to see the dynamic and how they actually are in person and just kind of just see that. I mean, I'm sure they'll be, cordial and everything as well to each other. But I think we're waiting for that to happen. We need to see those two in the same ring at some point here.
Yeah, and it's just interesting to me, like John Legere's had this lockdown for years, but this sort of like CEO as figurehead of company, it's just kind of unusual, but it seems like Marcelo Claret is increasingly positioning himself in a similar role. And these guys are really just duking it out for customers at this point. And I am interested to see maybe 2 quarters from now how that differentiation between them in terms of postpaid, prepaid subscribers goes.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Yeah, and again, I'm guessing T-Mobile must be feeling some pressure from Sprint, otherwise they wouldn't be doing this. And I'm guessing Sprint is feeling that need to kind of keep doing this. So obviously they're doing what they need to do. But and it was funny too because this all followed up on. I know T-Mobile last week also kind of updated some of their rate plans, and they started offering their customers unlimited data basically for 3 free months. So all their customers now, or as of November 23rd, I think it was what it was, will now have unlimited data for 3 months. Through the end of February, I believe it was what it is, which is an interesting move. Again, operators are kind of moving away from unlimited data, but T-Mobile, offering a little priming the pump there for the holiday season to get customers maybe on board, or at least keep customers from migrating to Sprint, saying, hey, if you stick with us through this little promotion that Sprint's got going on, you'll get unlimited data here for a few months. So, again, kind of a little back and forth between the two, kind of keeping the pressure up for all the customers.
Yeah, unlimited data is sort of the holy grail right now in terms of pieces of the bundle. And I thought your story was very interesting, and I had to dig back in our archives. This is about AT&T raising the price on their unlimited bundle. haven't done it since 2008. So, I mean, they really stuck at that price point for a long time. So I'd like to understand a little better what predicated that change. Is it sort of conditioning your customer base to understand that more data costs more money, aside from the standard sort of precept that I know I'm guilty of too? This is almost free. Why are you charging me so much for it? But
yeah.
how it goes. And I guess for AT&T, it's really not that big of a deal in terms of how many customers it affects, because they have so few of those people that are still hanging around on that unlimited data plan that they've slowly phased out. But it's interesting to see them raise that price point. And just when I mentioned, how do you arrive at $5? This is what it costs. I mean, what did Verizon, when they restructured unlimited data pricing, didn't they raise it by $20?
Yeah, pretty significant. Yeah, they which would seem to be a pretty good way to recoup some costs there.
Yeah, and then I wanted to ask you, I was reading another one of your stories, and something kind of jumped out at me. It was, I believe you spoke with Jennifer from Wells Fargo, getting some sort of predictions about the 600 megahertz auction in March next year. And I was surprised to see that she said one of the wild card bidders could possibly be SoftBank.
Yes, that was an interesting. Yeah, that information with it, because that was again, SoftBank owns Sprint, and Sprint has already said they're not going to be part of this auction process. I've been trying to follow up a bit with her on that to kind of see where she might have heard something on that. But again, SoftBank, I mean, they're pretty much funding all of Sprint now, and have kind of requested that Sprint cut costs, and so it does look like they're trying to trim some costs there. But yeah, that was interesting.
So is that like a balance sheet thing then? Like in the scenario, SoftBank bidding as proxy for Sprint?
Yeah, I think it makes more sense that way, because obviously, I mean, if Sprint were to go in the auction and bid $5 billion, let's say, I'm sure investors would not be very happy with Sprint in the midst of them trying to do all this other stuff. They have Spectrum already. So yeah, it would make sense, I guess, to an extent for SoftBank to come in and say, hey, we'll put this on our balance sheet. We're a little more diversified. We can kind of absorb this better. And then we could lease the spectrum to Sprint, and they could use it. So it'd be interesting to see if SoftBank is one of the actual bidders. I don't think we've seen the list yet of qualified bidders, but if SoftBank is on that list, that will be an interesting move by Sprint and SoftBank to kind of be part of that by proxy through SoftBank.
Yeah, and I think it worth mentioning that she called out two other wild cards as Google and Comcast. Assumption being that they have some sort of strategic plan to launch MVNO type, definitely MVNOs for Google and Comcast. I guess they could use new spectral assets to bolster the spectral assets they have access to that are held by Verizon. But it's just really interesting to see what could be possible in terms of, I guess, when we talk about network convergence, I always think about the AT&T Dish thing, where a telecom company acquires a pay TV provider, but you never really consider the inverse and the fact that, maybe Comcast really could be a formidable wireless carrier in a couple years.
True. And again, too, I mean, the one thing, obviously Comcast has bid in auctions before. They have won spectrum that they then sold off. And again, that process showed that they could actually, make a little bit of money off the deal too. I mean, the beauty of spectrum is, you buy it, you hold on to it. It never seems to go down in price. The value of it's always increasing. So, worst comes to worst, if you don't want to launch a service, I'm sure you'll find somebody who can buy it from you for a tiny little profit too. So, as long as you have the money up front to pay for it, it's one of those assets that seems to gain value. So yeah, either for Comcast that way, or even for Google, they've participated in the past as well. Not really actually bought spectrum, but it could be interesting to see what their future plans are. I mean, they're definitely diversifying their operations, so who knows what they want to do.
It's like real estate, right? They don't make it anymore, so it's inherently valuable.
That's right, exactly. So they're always looking to pick some up. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see what happens as those names come out and who might get involved in it. But that'll be an interesting process as that plays out. But I saw something this week too. I think you found actually, I think over the weekend, which I thought was really interesting, was Sprint has another countdown going on here. I think they're going to announce some new thing. It's not something they seem to be really promoting on their main website, but you found it through some other channels there. But can you tell us a little bit about what you saw there?
Well, I love a ambiguous countdown clock, regardless of the scenario. But I think December 7th is what we're counting down to here, and I don't know. It's going to be some kind of holiday promotion. I would guess that since they've already covered the bill credit sort of end of the promotional scale, that maybe it'll be something device oriented. But I really don't know. I'm just kind of guessing on that.
Yeah. But
And then maybe you can give me some clarity here. I've only been working in this industry for a little over a year. Do you normally expect to see a lot of these promotional offers get ramped up in the run up to Christmas? Is that a thing?
that is pretty common. I would say that's been an issue. But this year seems to be a little more aggressive. And again, I think it's because of the positioning of the operators. I think last year Sprint was still in such chaos with the new management coming in that they were just trying to get their feet, trying to find their feet. So T-Mobile didn't have to be quite as aggressive. Sprint or Verizon and AT&T weren't very aggressive either. So this is probably a little above normal, but yeah, it's typically kind of happens where you get these run-ups. But definitely, it's good to kind of see these operators from a news perspective, at least, being this aggressive, because it gives us, some exciting stuff to watch, and definitely is making the market more dynamic and more interesting to kind of cover.
Oh yeah, and just rest assured, when that countdown clock rolls to 0, I'll be there.
I know you're waiting for it. I know it's your screensaver at this point. So
yeah,
you're on that thing.
On Kinney RCR. It'll be up on Twitter almost instantly.
Yeah, but it'll be interesting. Right? I wonder what they're planning. I mean, obviously, T-Mobile coming at back at Sprint with that offer of $200 for the customers. Sprint's already done, like you said, kind of did that 50% off offer to all the other customers. Yeah, I mean, I wonder if the next move is some sort of device, maybe a service type of offering. I mean, I can't really imagine they're going to outdo their 50% off discount. So it's got to be, I'm guessing, something else. But they already have some pretty good lease deals out there as well. I mean, for the Samsung devices and the iPhone. Yeah, I wonder what their next move will be. So.
Well, I mean, I guess if we're thinking of them in the context of competing most directly with T-Mobile, they would have a big opportunity to do something in the ballpark of Music Freedom or Binge On, where you're, like you said, a new service, but that would certainly be beneficial in the age of unlimited data. But,
yeah, and they have already rolled that out with their Virgin Mobile prepaid brand, where they offer a streaming music service there too. So maybe they could just be bringing that up to the full offering there for the whole carrier. So that could be an option as well. That might be maybe something they're looking to doing. And it's also interesting too that kind of see as these two are kind of battling. Verizon and AT&T for the most part have kind of been on the sidelines. I mean, they've rolled out some promotions. There were some Black Friday things, some Cyber Monday deals. Nothing extreme. I mean, nothing service rate plan oriented for the most part. I mean, obviously AT&T raised prices for unlimited, but that was a small portion there. But no, it seems like really from those guys, no aggressive moves. Are kind of sitting back and seemingly let those two smaller guys kind of go at each other's throats and just kind of let it all play out.
Yeah, and I guess in terms of timing with the holiday, maybe it'd be a little different if the iPhone 6S came out like last week instead of a few months ago. We might see something a little more interesting and cutthroat. But yeah, I guess maybe with no killer must-have device for the holiday season, it's kind of hard to build a promotion.
Yeah, that's true. And maybe, I guess, maybe this week too, I know T-Mobile, like we said earlier, I mean, they promised each week to target a new carrier. Last week they targeted Sprint. So we're guessing this week at some point they'll target either Verizon or AT&T with something. And so maybe that might instigate, a counter move by either one of those operators. I mean, who knows? We'll see what T-Mobile comes out with. I mean, their last move wasn't the most creative move, but again, we'll see what that maybe, pokes the bear a little bit and maybe gets them to react. So who knows how it'll play out.
Yeah. So who are you hearing from in your interview today?
Well, yeah. So I recently had a chance to speak with Steve Hilton, who's at a company called MacNation. They do a lot of focus on the IoT space, which I know you cover a lot there as well for RCR. And so, yeah, they were doing, I talked to them a little bit about, I guess, how operators should be focused on the IoT space. Because, again, operators, IoT is this new dynamic market coming out for operators. And some of them are pretty focused on it. Other ones are not quite as much. And what Steve kind of provided was an overview of how they might want to approach this new IoT space, from a networks perspective, from a services perspective, from a rate plan perspective, what they could do to kind of gear their services and gear their operations towards being prepared for IoT. So yeah, I spoke with Steve a bit about that topic, and so maybe let's take a look at the interview here now. Well, thanks for joining us today. Today we are joined by Steve Hilton, who's the industry analyst at MacNation, to talk a bit about the IoT space and how it relates to the telecom and carrier space. Hey, Steve, thanks for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me here, Dan.
Great. Well, obviously, IoT is becoming, it's a buzzword. We'll say it's a buzzword. Internet of Things is out there. People are talking about it. It's a whole growing industry. A lot of operators are taking it pretty seriously, really targeting that market. Others, maybe not so much. but hoping to get from you some insight. Obviously, I know you cover the IoT space quite in depth there, and so we're hoping to get some insight there. So maybe start off with, what's your general overview of kind of where the IoT market, where are we at today in terms of how it's relating to the mobile industry? Because obviously the mobile carriers are a big part of this. Where do you see the market at today in terms of advances and development and deployments, and kind of just a general overview, big picture view of where we are today?
Sure, Dan. Well, there's a lot going on in IoT, and I guess the way I look at it is, if you think about sort of the forecasts over the next 10 years, we're talking about tens of billions of connected things, right? So MapNation forecast by the year 2025 will have 24 billion connected things, accounting for about $2.5 trillion US worth of revenue. So it's a big pie out there, right? And I think the other thing to keep in mind is, when you look at, of that entire pie, what portion of that pie is the connectivity piece? Probably about 15 to 20% of it is the connectivity piece. A lot of that is associated with the value that mobile network operators and MVNOs also generate in IoT from the sale of just the connectivity, the managed connectivity element, right? There's a whole lot of other types of solutions sort of on top of that also that mobile operators are focused on as well, that allow them to capture an even larger percent. So instead of capturing the 15, 20%, there's a greater pie for them.
Yeah, interesting. That's good that you kind of break apart those different parts of it, because again, people, we see these big numbers about the dollar amounts and things like that, and it's interesting kind of hear that you guys are actually able to kind of parse out where we're actually going to see some of that revenue, because we do see the big numbers, and that's one thing, but yeah, that's kind of interesting to kind of hear where they're going to actually see the value from this growth. And obviously, like you said, it's people are talking big numbers. I know Ericsson had some numbers a few years ago about what they were predicting, but I think people are coming a little more reality to that. And it sounds like your numbers seem to be a little bit more in line of probably with more people are thinking about, at least in terms of the broader deployment and rollout of these services.
I think so, Dan. I mean, I think the trick here is, when we look at our numbers, we break them out several ways. One is by industry sector that says, okay, well, in terms of number of device connections, the biggest number of device connections is going to be, utility sector, right? Next big number of device connections to be in the automotive and transport sector. So you can look at these sort of growths by industry sector. You can also look at these numbers by the sort of technology layers, right, which is what we initially did, right? Which is to say, 15%, 20% is associated with connectivity and connectivity management. There's another 10 to 15% associated with the sale of the devices themselves, the revenue from the sale of the devices. There's 30% associated with sort of application platform and apps dev, et cetera. And you can just sort of build up from there. Another way to look at this is to think about the types of end users. What percent are going to be large businesses consuming these IoT services? What percent are going to be government type agencies? And what percent are going to be small and medium businesses? Another way to look at the division. Just to get a little bit more real with these numbers, right?
That's good to see. I mean, we like a little bit of reality. It's always good to see that in the market where, it's always about the hype, but it's good to see some reality as well, too. And I know we ran a column recently that you provided to kind of looking at some of the M&A activity also in the space, too. I know you're digging in quite a bit with this, too, and it does seem like there's so much activity happening that eventually, there's going to be a lot of kind of the behind the scenes stuff happening as well, which is going to really kind of alter the landscape, it seems, for who the players are in the space going forward, too.
It's pretty interesting when you look at the IoT mergers and acquisitions, and then you tie it back to our forecasts. I mean, what it generally shows is that the sectors of the technology stack in IoT that are generating the higher percentages of revenue tend to be valued more highly in the market, right? So if you're an application enablement provider, sort of in that apps layer of the stack, the expectation is you're going to be responsible for a lot of the revenue enablement in IoT. And so your companies in that area of the stack tend to be trading at, say, a 16 to 20 times revenue multiple. Whereas, MVNOs, responsible for sort of a smaller chunk of the entire IoT revenue spectrum and generally trade in the 2 to 5 times revenue multiple. So it ties in, there's M&A activity, and the valuation of those types of companies ties in really closely with our forecasting at MapNation.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. I guess maybe take a look at the technology aspect of this. I mean, I think we have both been in this industry a while now, and have kind of seen, I mean, the IoT space used to be called, I think, the machine-to-machine space, or there was these names for it back in the day. And I remember when 2G networks were out there, people would say, hey, these 2G networks are going to be great for these types of services, because it's a very, it just needs to ping the network every once in a while and doesn't really need a lot of information. And then 3G was going to help out a little bit with maybe a little more data intensive applications. LTE was going to help with some video streaming if that was needed. I guess as you look at kind of at the evolution of kind of this market, has it been, I guess, at the pace you have expected, and how's the technology kind of, I guess, gone along with this progression of how people are actually looking to use kind of this new, connecting everything to the network now?
You ask a really good question. I mean, although first of all, Dan, I mean, we should point out you're a lot older than I am.
Well,
right?
Thank you. Appreciate it. Yes.
So I joke.
No, it's true.
On the network side, there's so many things going on. I mean, and this varies a lot by region of the world, right? So, in Europe, 2G, 3G, Western Europe, 2G, 3G, 4G networks, are anticipated to stay in place for quite some time, and M2M IoT type solutions are being sold on all of those. Yes. Certainly 2G is a plenty good technology, primarily GPRS, plenty good for a lot of these sort of M2M kind of simple solutions. In the States, of course, there are operators who are talking about turning off 2G, right? And so then you have to sit back and say, well, okay, you can do M2M and 3G and 4G, but generally the module costs, the device connection costs, the module costs are quite a bit higher, right? And so, I think there's a lot of interest in sort of these newer IoT-specific network technologies, the so-called narrowband IoT technologies. You've heard of them like LoRa and Sigfox and narrowband IoT. And so there's some kind of interesting stuff going on. And AT&T, Verizon are looking at these things. Vodafone has announced they're looking at narrowband IoT. KPN, in the Netherlands-based operator, has announced and actually made an investment in LoRa, right? Mm-hmm. So, last week I was in Europe and the LoRa launch happened, right, in the Netherlands, a really interesting event. So I think there's a lot of interest here. I mean, Dan, I step back. I mean, I remember early on in my career in telecommunications, this was back in the early 90s, I worked at a company called Telephone and Data Systems, TDS, in the United States, and we owned a paging company called American Paging. And paging was big back then, if you remember. I mean, everyone had a pager. I had 2 pagers. Everyone had pagers. and what happened to the paging industry, right? And now I look at the sort of thoughts around narrowband IoT, right, which is low battery power, long life of the devices, very small amounts of data upstream and downstream, like, cell sites that sort of broadcast over kilometers.
It sounds familiar.
Back to the future, Dan. We're creating paging networks all over again, right? So you got to look at this and say, okay, there's a lifetime here, right? These networks, these narrowband networks, these LoRa networks, what are they going to last? 5 years? 10 years, right? And then by the time we have 5G, maybe we'll have a way to sort of do it better, and we'll sort of shut them off, right?
Yeah. That's a good point, because it does seem like, I mean, you're right, there are all these new networks coming out, and it's like seems like every week now there is a new standard, or somebody's got some great idea of what they're going to do to make this more efficient. But at the end of the day, it seems like this is all being driven by the larger mobile operators. They're the ones who are really going to be deploying these networks. They have the scale to do it. And if the last thing they want to do is run 4 different networks. I mean, they want to run as few networks as possible. If they can make everything run over one network, obviously that's why Verizon and AT&T are looking to shut off the 2G networks. They want to consolidate their networks, use more spectrum more efficiently. They don't want to add more networks on top of that. And so it seems like when you see these new technologies come out, you're like, really? I mean, obviously they're great ideas. I'm sure they're great efficient wise, but at the end of the day, I mean, the operators aren't they're going to look at kind of what makes the most sense for their own broader deployments. And it's good to have some of the big guys looking at these, but it is kind of strange. You're about to kind of see these things pop up again. It's like, this all kind of sound familiar, and they've come and gone, and it's just a weird market out there.
It is. It's completely weird. But it's happened in IoT before. It happened, if you think about the way that carriers initially brought sort of device connections onto their network, right? They use sort of internal systems that were really kludgy, very expensive to use. They were set up initially to, sort of activate and provision the SIM inside of a smartphone, right? And here we have now these M2M devices, and they realize, okay, we need a fast, cheap way to do this. And so basically they contracted with people like, well, back then it would have been like Telenor Connection or Jasper Wireless. No, Telenor Connection was bought by Ericsson, but right. So they in essence built a technology stack that I think we could call OSS BSS that would ride along with their legacy technology stacks, right? And why? Well, because Amdocs wasn't providing it, or just wasn't providing it, right? And so they built this separate technology stack, and they're doing the same thing on the network side, which is okay. This doesn't really work in sort of a 2G, 3G, 4G environment. The battery life is not long enough in these devices. Frankly, we don't need so much bandwidth anyway, right? We need just sort of short data bursts, right? And there's some issues around cybersecurity also, right? And so, it's not all that surprising to me. It just feels a little bit, like Back to the Future, like there really could be probably a better way to do this.
Yeah, I guess that's one downside to being in industry too long is that, these little memories start popping up in your mind and you're not sure, am I just getting too old? Am I remembering these things correctly? Is this really happening again? But it's always, I guess, one of the downsides. You'll find out eventually when you get older about being at an advanced age like I am. So you'll find out.
Thanks, Dan.
Yeah, no problem. But I guess as you look at now, for those operators who are getting involved in this, I guess, maybe, first of all, how should they view the IoT space? I mean, obviously, it is still relatively small, probably in the overall big picture of things, but what should their emphasis be at this point? I mean, should they be diverting a lot of resources to it? What's your view on how they should be approaching, I guess, the general market of playing in the IoT world?
Look at it this way, if you look at operators' businesses in the developed world, so mobile, right? In the developed world, the growth rate of mobile SIMs for sort of person-to-person communication, smartphones and feature phones, right? What is it on average? It's decreasing like 0.5% a year.
Yeah, pretty flat to going down. Yeah.
Right. So you got that going on, right? So revenue is either flat or slightly decreasing. On the M2M IoT sides of their business, on average in the developed world, things are increasing. Number of mobile connections is increasing 20 to 40% a year for every operator. And so, generally boards of directors look at that and say, okay, well, there's my growth. However, my ARPU, much lower. My sort of the way I approach market quite differently, right? Yeah. And I think what operators are looking at right now is they're saying, okay, when we think about what we're going to sell, it can't be just sort of connectivity only, right? Because that sort of pigeonholes them into a business that, gets you $3 to $4 a month per connection. That's not all you get out of that. It's a good business, right? As long as you sort of match costs, but doesn't allow you to grow too fast. I think what a lot of operators are doing is they're looking at probably 3 areas. The most important of which is the first, which is really solution development. And I think you're finding operators like Vodafone who are saying, okay, we're going to dominate a given industry sector or a given solution type from the top of the stack to the bottom, right? We're going to have the network. We're going to have the devices that we build ourselves. We're going to have the services that we provide. We're going to have the application platform layer, right? So that's what they're doing in sort of the automotive, the telematics sector, right? With their purchase of Cobra, right? Where they've rebranded Vodafone, right? Right. Or another example would be, a European operator like Tele2, right? Sort of a really sort of scrappy challenger kind of approach, which is, okay, we're going to come into the market and we're going to provide the connectivity management, and we're going to have this amazing partnership program where we bring in a series of partners who are going to provide application enablement, who are going to provide application development, who are going to provide IoT cybersecurity, and systems integration, a whole series of other partners that come in and provide, a more complete solution that Tele2 can then go out to the market and sort of bring those partners into deals, or the partners can bring them into deals. So I think solution development is a key area. Different operators are doing different approaches. I think the next thing we've already talked about, which is sort of networks, how do we deal with this narrowband stuff? And my opinion is you got to look at it, right? We can't sort of turn our backs to it. I think we just need to be really cognizant of building more and more networks, and how many do we want that are not interconnected? LoRa and Sigfox and Narrowband IoT. I mean, what? That doesn't make any sense. I think the last area is really around the area of IoT cybersecurity. Sort of what operators are doing there are frankly not doing at all. So Mac Nation ran just this last month an IoT cybersecurity report and a series of vendor recommendations, and we must have invited 40 vendors and carriers to participate in our iOS cybersecurity review. So we had a questionnaire, we did a whole series of demos and things like that. And do you know how many carriers wanted to participate?
A lot?
0. No, it was unbelievable. They all talk about cybersecurity. Look, I mean, Verizon even put out an IoT, security certificate product.
Yeah.
Right. However, when sort of you push them to the floor and say, okay, let's talk about security and what you're actually doing, don't want to talk about it. The folks who really wanted to talk about security and clearly are doing some amazing things in IoT cybersecurity, companies like ARM, like Cisco, like Bayshore Networks, like Wipro, like IBM. I mean, there's a lot of really amazing things going on in cyber today, but I think the carriers need to spin around and recognize, a lot of their heritage and a lot of their brand is tied up in the sort of security and reliability of what they do. Security is the top inhibitor to IoT right now from the enterprise side. Carriers have something to say. Say it.
Yeah, that's an interesting part of it, because it's like, it does seem like you're right, because operators do seem to have this level of trust with customers. Because again, their networks are, it seems, fairly secure, and they've done a really good job of making sure, that's kind of a big part of what they've done, at least historically, with the voice and things like that. But you're right, it's kind of weird that, and obviously, IoT is perhaps a little different world for them, but they should be taking advantage of that trust that they have on the market and really being at the forefront of that, because they are that transport mechanism, or they can be if they want, for these services, and it seems like it's a no-brainer to really be on board with that.
But I mean, there's more to even say just on the network layer. I mean, we know that carrier networks are super secure, most of them, right? Like, right? But there's a lot more that they can also say. I mean, there are plenty of carriers around the world that do work in sort of the application enablement space, right? And Orange is a good example. They're building their own application enablement platform, right? So there's a story there to share about the quality of sort of Orange for managed connectivity, Orange for sort of data center security, Orange for application enablement security, right? Other carriers are partnering up for the application enablement layer with companies like vendors like, there's a German company called Cumulocity that does application enablement. There's a company that's sort of dual headquartered in Ireland and the States called Davra Networks. They do some really interesting stuff in application enablement as well. So I think there's a big story here that carriers can talk about with security.
Yeah, and so it seems like in the big picture of things, operators really need to not just focus on just being the connection, because again, that is the low ARPU, not a huge revenue driver for them. But again, unless they keep the cost low, but really almost a value add. What else can they provide besides just the connectivity part of it? And again, if it's security, if it's application, I mean, whatever they can put on top of that and offer that to, whatever the enterprise is out there, whoever needs the device, it seems to be. That probably more the revenue generator part of it, because that's going to be, people are probably willing to spend a few more bucks if they can get something besides just connectivity for it, and that's it's not a lot of additional costs hopefully associated with that for the operator.
Yeah, and the trick from the operator side is that you probably can't provide an end-to-end solution to every single type of enterprise in your market. Right? So you got to be smart, and you have to say, okay, like an AT&T, we're going to really go strong after the automotive sector, utility sector, smart home, right? Or if you're Vodafone, we're going to go really heavy after utility and automotive, right? Or your KPM, we're going to go after heavy industry, or your Telenor connection in the Nordics, who's going to go after, some really, deep, heavy equipment types of companies, right? And companies, these carriers know where their strengths are, right? And in IoT, they need to leverage those strengths and go after them hot and heavy.
Yeah, and it seems like, you brought up a lot of companies that have been at least publicly pretty aggressive in these spaces as well too. I mean, for those operators who don't seem to be as aggressive in the market, are they obviously they're probably missing out at least on getting at least their feet wet in the process. I mean, how important is it for those guys to really kind of start making some moves? I mean, you got to start doing something at some point. I mean, are they losing out? Are they kind of missing that window where they can really be a part of this? Or what would be your recommendation for those operators who are, maybe a little slow on the uptake here?
There's a path to success here. Well, I mean, what I generally find with all operators is whether they know it or not, they have M2M IoT connections in their business. They've just been selling them as, just general, mobile SIMs, right? Mobile connections over the years. And they may not even recognize that they've got lots of sort of non-traditional connections. They're not smartphones. They're not tablets. They're sort of weird things that have been connected. So they already have them. So the trick here is there's a path to success. And the path for success starts with, one, counting what you already have. Two, creating an organization that's dedicated and off to the side, like a little startup business unit to do this, right? And we have, from in our research at MacNation, we have sort of numbers on, okay, how many marketing folks do you need? How many product marketing folks do you need? How many finance folks? How about operations folks, et cetera, right? To help them start, right? The next thing you need to do is sort of take stock of what your current partner network is like, right? So that you can understand what existing partners you can leverage, both on the technology side as a carrier, but also on the sales channel side. Because carriers, they're good at selling, sort of, smartphone SIMs, right, to enterprise customers, right? But they're not as good selling these more sort of complex IoT things in general, the sales folks there, right? So there's a series of steps to success here that we work with carriers around the world who maybe aren't quite as far along, but sort of want to get up to speed and frankly want to avoid the mistakes that other carriers made 5-6 years ago when all this started to become really hot.
Yeah, I guess that's a good point. Yeah, maybe they're a little slow on the uptake, but they can obviously learn from what's happened in the past, be a little more focused that way and kind of get into the market without having to stumble here and there and be a little more focused that way. So that makes sense to do. So well, that sounds good. Well, yeah, Steve, I definitely appreciate the great insight in this. Obviously, the IoT space is blowing up. We all know that. Not to use the term that all the kids use nowadays, but it's blowing up apparently. And so it's getting bigger and bigger. And hopefully we can, again, touch base on this topic going forward. But again, I recommend those who are watching, like I said, Steve did provide a column for us a little bit ago looking at the M&A space when it came to IoT, which I thought was really interesting because I think that's a market or segment of the market no one's really paid much attention to yet because it is still so new. No one even thinks that there's this activity happening, but it is going on out there. So definitely recommend you check out that column on the RCR site too. But Steve, again, thanks for the time and insight today. We definitely appreciate it.
Hey, anytime, Dan. Take care.
All right, we'll talk again soon. Thanks so much.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Well, that'll do it for this week's Carrier Wrap. I want to again thank our guest, Sean Kinney, who's a managing editor here at RCR, as well as Steve Filton from MacNation, talking about IoT strategies for mobile operators. And again, make sure to check us out again next week for a new episode.